Welcome to Nutrition Talk Tuesday, episode 2. My name is Nicole Kale, board certified holistic nutritionist, and today's episode, we are going to talk all about emotional eating. What does that even mean? Emotional eating can be undereating, overeating, obsessive food control. Pretty much most of our wellness journey is dictated by some form of emotion, and it can be good emotion or bad emotion. But most times what's leading us is some type of emotion. We just can't always identify what it is, and not every emotion is going to serve you. So for today, I'm gonna be referencing to micro and macro emotions. And a reference that I use is this really awesome PDF. It's an emotional wheel chart. If you want that, at the end of this episode when it's over, click the link in my bio for free. I will send that to you in your email at the end of the week. It's gonna be covering all the stuff that I'm talking about today, but the main thing that you're going to want to use is the actual cheat sheet of micro to macro emotions. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about that, what does emotional eating mean? Well, obviously, it just means we're feeling something. There's an emotion we're experiencing, and it's dictating our decisions with food. And let me be very clear here. We can be having a healthy relationship with food and experiencing emotion in that process. Likewise, we can be having an awful relationship with food, and those emotions that are not serving us are dictating what we are doing and why we are struggling. So the first question I always like to ask is, let's think about what you're really hungry for. That's always a good way to kind of assess. Even if you're eating healthy and you feel like you're doing great, I always like to really dive in. Like, what are you really hungry for? What's the driving desire behind your reason for healthy eating, or what you think is healthy eating? And on the flip side, if you're constantly struggling with yo-yo dieting or binge eating or under eating or just obsessive food control, we need to understand what's driving that. And in order for us to understand, we have to get to root cause emotions to be able to peel back those layers and start to make behavioral changes that are going to serve us. Because not all emotions are going to serve you. Okay, so let's talk about macro emotion to micro emotion. And most of us can explain what is a macro emotion. Happy, sad, fearful, angry, disgusted, whatever it may be. Those are easy to identify emotions, and that's what we're going to refer to as a macro emotion. Where it gets a little tricky is the micro emotions. When we are emotional about anything, especially if it's not necessarily a positive emotion, we become pretty irrational, and it's hard sometimes to see through those feelings. So in order to see through them, we have to start peeling back the layers of the macro emotions. So if your macro emotion is happy, we're going to use a positive emotion for this example. If your big emotion that you're experiencing, we'll say, is happy, what are your micro emotions? Well, it could be you're feeling proud, and you're feeling proud because you're feeling successful. And how does that pertain to your diet? Well, if you're feeling happy because you've been able to stick to a diet, it's serving you, you're feeling proud because after all these years, you finally broke the chains, and for years and years, you've been eating healthy. There's positive emotion there. And on the flip side, let's say you've been struggling with diet. You're feeling sad. You're feeling shame. And that shame makes you feel wrong. Nothing about that sits well with you. Well, the big emotion, the macro emotion is I can just say I'm feeling sad about my diet. And then if we fan it out a little bit, we can say we're feeling shame. We're feeling wrong. There's guilt because we know that we aren't fueling our body for what it needs. In some form, we're punishing our body. And that can also come in the form of being very obsessive about your food. When we are obsessing about our food and we're hyper controlling of it, oftentimes that is from feeling shame, feeling fear, feeling guilt, right? And we have to get to those root cause feelings to be able to start making behavioral changes. And so emotional eating isn't black and white. It's really specific to you. There are so many layers involved with starting to change your relationship with food. And the first one is gaining emotional intelligence. It's being able to discern what is the main emotion and really what is that main emotion being driven from. and that would be the micro emotions. So if there's guilt and shame, and we know that those are the smaller, those are the root cause emotions, we know that the overall feeling you're experiencing is sad. We have to be able to identify those. And once you can identify them, you can start making positive changes. So the first step in understanding emotional eating is to being able to identify those macro emotions, the big ones: happy, sad, fearful, disgust, angry. Those are your big ones. Once you can identify those, it's going to get a lot easier for you to understand the driving forces behind some of the issues you're having with your diet: undereating, overeating, obsessive food control, and so on. So once you can identify those root cause emotions, which are the micro emotions, because we now have step one, which is getting the macro, the big ones. Now we're on to step two, which is being able to identify the tiny, the ones that are actually pulling at your heartstrings, right? Those ones that we can't, when we're emotional and irrational, we have a hard time saying, gosh, I'm just feeling so much shame or guilt or dissatisfaction. Those are the harder micro emotions to identify when the overall feeling is just, I'm sad, right? I'm so sad and I can't really explain why. So it's peeling back the macro emotion to get to the innards, to get to the inside of those micro emotions. So that is step two. Once you can identify the micro emotions, then what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you stop. Stop for one moment and acknowledge that feeling. If it's shame, if it's guilt, if it's fear, acknowledge it. Why are we feeling that? For some, it can be, you know what? My parents are overweight and I'm terrified of being overweight. So a lot of your decision in food making comes from, I don't want to be heavy set like my parents. Or maybe your only sense of worth comes from what your image might be. And so that shame, that fear, it all feels wrong. It doesn't sit well. So every time you're making decisions with food, it's not coming from a positive place. It's coming from a place of anxiousness, right? So those micro emotions that are just trailing after you are constantly knocking you off your game. And so we have to give acknowledgement to those micro emotions. And once you can acknowledge them, you're then going to replace them with logic. So if you're feeling shame around food, to replace them with logic, you have to start saying, okay, I'm feeling shame. I'm feeling shame because I ate a cookie. I'm feeling shame because I ate more than 2,000 calories. I'm feeling shame because XYZ. You plug it in, whatever it is for you. And you're going to replace it with the truth. Because the logical side of you and the truth will start to break the vicious cycle of dysfunctional emotions that are not serving you. So that's step two. Step three is having patience and grace with yourself. It takes time. And a lot of personal development work, it's harder. It is so much more difficult to do the personal development work than it is to just eat healthy or not eat healthy. When we have to address hurtful parts, or maybe not so hurtful parts, things that just aren't serving us in our soul, it's not fun. And oftentimes we're going back years from our childhood. And so when we're addressing those, it doesn't always stick right away. And it feels like work and it's annoying. And when you're having a good day and then you're stopped dead in your tracks by a not so great micro emotion, and you're like, great, Nicole, Kale talked about this. I don't really want to acknowledge it. It's those times that we don't want to do it where we have to do it, because in the end, once you gain emotional intelligence, once you can identify macro to micro and replace it with logic and truth and things that serve you, even if it's hard during that process, at the end of that journey, not only does emotional intelligence feed so much of your relationship with food, it's going to bleed into every area of your life. If you want to be successful, if you want to have good relationships, if you want to be a person that just feels complete, you need to have emotional intelligence. And so these little exercises are just tiny snippets of how we begin to gain wisdom with our emotions and how we be a little more logical and graceful with ourselves during this process. So just remember, if you're undereating, if you're overeating, if you're binge eating, if you're being restrictive with your food, It is not the end of your life. All it means is that you've got to gain some emotional understanding of your inner emotions, those micro emotions. Take it one day at a time, and just know that you didn't get here in a day, and it's going to take you a little bit of acknowledgement, of understanding, and really of building a relationship with yourself so you can build a better relationship with food. If you found this video helpful, please send me a DM, comment, like, or share. We appreciate you, and I am so excited that you allowed me to be of service to you today.